What's up, y'all? Welcome back to the More Than a Minute podcast. This is your boy, Isaac, and today we have some special guests in the building. I've been looking forward to having them on this podcast for a while, and this is the day that we finally have them on the podcast. This is the day that the Lord has made. I'll rejoice and be glad that they're finally here.
Amen.
As I normally have introductions for all of our guests, this guest that we have today, they have a stacked resume. So I'm going to keep it as simple as possible. But both of them serve at their local church. Pastor Jonathan serves as the creative pastor, and Pastor Brandi, you serve as the executive ministry pastor. Both are kingdom entrepreneurs and have a passion for people and a passion for Christ. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce and welcome to y'all today, the Martinez tribe.
Woo!
Let's go.
That was an introduction.
Yeah, so how y'all doing? How y'all feeling today?
Amazing.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm doing good.
That was an introduction.
That was an introduction, man.
It felt like Space Jam a little.
Yeah.
Like standing.
Always try to bring honor to our guests that we have, man. You know what I mean? Whether that's like looking at their background, I'll stalk their Facebook, their Instagram. But you guys, I know you guys, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like, I didn't have to really do that. But so a few Sundays ago, you guys both ministered together at church, right?
Yeah.
The title of your sermon was Realistic
Marriage.
And so I love that. And so with this whole podcast episode, and I'm saying this just, you know, for those that are listening and watching right now, the whole podcast episode is going to resolve around that idea. Because I think it's important as the body of Christ, right, that we have strong marriages in the church, right? Because if we have strong marriages, we have stronger impact, I believe, that we can make on the world, right? When we're all doing our parts. But enough about me, right? That was just my introduction, right? Now I want y'all to kind of introduce yourselves. We'll start with Pastor Brandi, and then we'll go to...
All right. So, Brandi Martinez. I am from CG. Born and raised. I'm an OG. And let's see, I'm at Passion Church. I am an executive pastor there. I love it. We have 3 children. Outside of that, I love education. I'm currently getting my master's in organizational leadership, and I will graduate in May. And so I love soccer, I love people, and I love coffee.
Jonathan Martinez. Also raised up in CG and got 3 kids. I'm the creative pastor at Passion and deal with more of the creative things like cameras and worship and all of those things. So
yeah, and so since this episode is gonna have to do with marriage, I think it'll be good for the audience to know, how did you two meet, and what was the first thought that came to your mind when you locked eyes into her, she locked eyes onto you. So let's hear it. I want to hear it. How did y'all meet?
I guess they're going to hear 2 different stories. So which one do you want to hear first?
is it?
Do you want to go, or do you want me to go? Okay, go.
I mean, we went to the same high school, kind of knew of each other.
Yeah.
Not really know each other that well.
High school gave me a bad vibe of you, though.
Did you?
Yeah, he had a girlfriend in high school.
Oh, man.
And I didn't really know him, but what I did see of him, I was like, that guy's a jerk.
Oh,
so
man.
that was like my impression of him for like 3 or 4 years.
Yeah. And then it's kind of like when you add that person on Facebook, you don't really know, but you just kind of add them because you kind of know of them.
Yeah.
That's what he did.
And then she would post like Bible verses all the time. And then I was like, cool verse.
You're slowly trying to get there. And then eventually, did you slide in her DMs or what happened?
Yeah, he did.
Probably her comments first.
Comments back then. And then
I invited her she wanted to learn piano.
And then he told me he played the piano. And then
Jonathan.
I gave her 1 free lesson, and that was it.
Free lesson. Wait, did you charge her after that?
no, he only gave me 1.
She only wanted 1 lesson.
So you just laying down the groundwork first.
Yeah. And then we dated. We broke up. And then we dated and got married. That's a short version.
You broke up, you dated, and you got married. It's like I always make fun of like my wife and I. She's sitting right here for those of you that can't see her. I always tell her like, man, like we started dating, right? And then like the same night she was like, you know what? I need to think about this. And she broke up with me and she made me wait like a whole week. That was the longest week of my life, bro.
Aww.
Man, but you know what I mean? Because I liked her. I was feeling her. So I was like, yeah, I could do it. Yeah, can I say that? My bad. Okay. We're married now. We're married now. And so you ultimately made the first move?
I would say so.
Yeah,
Yeah,
to an extent.
to an extent.
Yeah.
I would say so.
Why were you dropping hints, Brandi?
I wasn't fully dropping hints, but I feel like back then Jonathan was very like passive and very quiet. And so I think it was really difficult to know like what he wanted. Right. So, but you can get to that later.
Amen. So we're going to fast forward a little bit. So like, I got to know because a lot of people know you guys here in town. A lot of people want to know your story. So that's why I wanted to like kind of talk about like how you guys met. You made the first move. Like, what did that look like? Did you like plan it out? Like, hey, I'm going to ask her to be my girlfriend. Did you talk to your family? Like, what happened?
Do you want me to tell that part first?
Sure, go ahead.
So I didn't have a car and I was going to Central Arizona College, CAC. And we had not met yet. We were just Facebook messaging, texting, and then I happened to say, oh, I have to wait here till like 6 p.m. because my mom can't pick me up from school. And he's like, I'll pick you up. And I was like, in my mind, I'm like, haven't met this guy. I can get in this car. He could be a serial killer. Like, what's going to happen? So he picks me up and his car's a mess. Like, there's trash all over the front passenger seat. And then he tells me the biggest lie on earth. What? And he says, my car is normally not this dirty. And that's not true because it happened to stay like that for a long time. And so anyways, that's how we officially met the first time. After that, I really don't remember how he asked me to be his girlfriend the first time. Unless you remember.
No, I don't remember that part.
No. But I think it's important to know the backstory because somehow he asked me. And then at that point in my life, I was 19 or 18, going to be 19. And I was already so in love with Jesus. I knew I was called into ministry at the age of 18. And so I was like on fire. And he said he was a Christian. Not that he wasn't, but he said he was a Christian. And so I kind of expected the same type of enthusiasm for Jesus. Yeah. And I didn't see that. But anyways, even to the point where when I first met his parents, I didn't even get introduced. He just walked me in. It was so awkward. And I'm sharing all this because we'll tie it into anything else we're going to talk about. But, he didn't introduce me or anything. And I think back then, if I would have been more mature in my walk with the Lord, it would have been a lot of, not red flags, but things that I should have considered was it even time for me to date? And so that's just like a little tidbit. But anyways, I'll let you explain your perspective.
I mean, kind of like that, I guess. I mean, I just remember picking you up, and giving you the piano lessons. And that was kind of how we started off or kicked off our relationship. But yeah, I was very much, I guess passive is the word. Non-gentleman-like.
That's awesome. I mean, that's not awesome, but like I was gonna say, that's awesome that she still gave you a chance. Like that's what I was gonna say. Yeah. You know what I mean? But that's so cool. So then fast forward, you guys finally get married, and what happened after that?
Yeah, so we've been married for 11 years. So we got married in March of 2013. And so it was a big year for both of us. We got married. We got our first car and graduated from ASU and then got our first house. And so everything sounds great and dandy. We firmly believe that the Lord blessed us in those areas because we tried to date with integrity. And I do believe that because we did that, the Lord honored that. But one thing that we talked about it was our first time preaching together, by the way, that Sunday. So it was a really cool Sunday for us.
Y'all need to do that more.
Yeah, thank you. But I would say that we discussed just what a realistic marriage is and how when we come into marriage, we come in with these expectations, whether we know it or we don't know it. We come in with expectations because of how we grew up, what we saw in our parents' marriage, what we didn't see. But the biggest expectation as a Christian, I think, is that you have an expectation of what a Christian marriage should be. And when it's not happening, tension starts to happen. I'll let you kind of go into that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, when during that time, I would even say right before we were getting married. I know for me, I was like during my teen years. I struggled with more like with just like sexual things, and I would always think like, oh, marriage is going to fix it. Marriage is going to fix it.
Wow.
Like that's normally what my mind would be going to, and so even whenever we were about to get married, we had about a 1 year engagement ish. And even us, I mean, we were getting like really, really close to the line, like, but we never like crossed it all the way. And that's why whenever I see other couples, they're having like a 3 year engagement and 4 year engagement. I'm like, yeah. I was like, yeah, it ain't gonna last that long. I know with us, we were on that line and we were trying to live for Christ as much as possible. But then once we got married, I mean, we realized all the things that we also had to deal with and go through. It wasn't so much just like a kind of a fix it type thing.
Right.
We had to go through just more communication and figuring out what does it mean to be married. Before marriage, it feels like everything was like very, like honeymoon like, and like, I mean, I felt like I could like just sweet talk her all the time and flirt with her and all that stuff. And then as time kind of goes on, you start to figure out, and we start to butt heads more, and then it starts to like fizzle a little bit, and then you got to find ways to create that back together.
Yeah, and so that's interesting. And then for like, he said something that's powerful. It's like when you have these issues and you're going into a marriage, getting married is not going to solve your lust problems.
Nope.
If you're addicted to pornography, all of that, you're not going to be set free from that just because you get married. And so eventually, even with that, did you eventually have to like tackle that on head on, or what did that healing look like for you, or that restoration process?
Yeah, I mean, for most part, it's just giving it to God. And then I know during up until we're about to get married and even our dating and stuff like that. Yeah, just giving it up to God, and then also like again dying to your flesh. I know we talked about that on Sunday, just dying to your flesh.
I think one thing to note too is that we both had sexual past in different forms, and so his was pornography, mine was also pornography at some point, and then just other areas in my life that I was struggling with. And so I think it is very important to know that as a believer, we're not the exception to not deal with these things. And that even when we come to Christ, we come to Christ in a messy place. And so those things, if they're not checked prior to marriage, or if they're not confessed to who you're going to marry, the enemy will literally use that to destroy your marriage. And so I think that, again, there is and I want a different podcast for this, but there's so much to say on purity in marriage, because I feel like once you get married, that word purity just kind of goes out the window. But I feel like there's such a holiness, that marriage is so holy that you have to think pure. But thinking pure is not just like sex. It's like all these other areas in marriage that you have to think of your spouse, yourself, like you said, dying to your flesh. And so I think for anybody who's considering getting married, who is married, who had any type of sexual struggle or is, I think it's just remembering that, like you said, like it doesn't just go away. Like marriage doesn't just take it away. It might alleviate some of the temptation, but there still has to be structures and boundaries that we both had when we came into marriage, that we had to communicate and say, hey, like, I don't right now, like, until I can trust that you will not watch something on the computer, on your phone, like, we had to set certain boundaries with each other and honor those, and then confess. There's something so powerful in marriage when we confess to one another, like when things don't go as they're supposed to go.
So it's like, yeah, that's good. So it's like even have like that accountability is super important,
Yeah.
right? And so like I know, like you said, like we'll we have to do another podcast on that. You know what I mean? But like you guys got married, you guys came in with different expectations, even different backgrounds. Because I remember you said that you grew up like in the traditional Spanish Christian church, right? And then you said you went to church like a couple times a year.
No, not very much.
Not very much. And so you guys get married, right? And this is happening with most married couples, right? You go in with your expectations and ideologies based off the examples that you have witnessed, right? Or the environment or your parents' marriage or the lack thereof. Maybe they weren't married, right? So you guys come together, and what happens after that?
I know for me, I didn't necessarily know what I needed to, how to be a husband, I guess. I mean, obviously, when you get married, you really kind of don't know that until you get into the thick of things. I was used to being like independent, Lone Ranger kind of type of thing, where I just take care of my own emotions, my own needs, and all that stuff. And so when Brandy came into the picture, and she would tell me that I'm not emotionally connecting with her, or all these other things, I start to like kind of confused as far as how much like my role is in that, especially in the beginning of our marriage. Connecting emotionally, I did not understand it.
Yeah, and I think for me going into the marriage, my background was I came from a divorced home. And so, and even before the divorce, there was a lot of domestic violence and abuse and things like that that I saw. And so I came into the marriage already in survival mode. My mind was just survival mode. I didn't know anything else. I knew Jesus. I loved Jesus, and I wanted the peace, but I didn't know how to get that. And so in our marriage before that, I was taught, be independent, provide for yourself, go get an education, because if a marriage doesn't work out, you need to have plan B, C, and D. And so I came into my marriage not wanting to get a divorce, but knowing that if it ever happened, I had a plan B. And so that made me be very controlling, and very much the dictator of like how things happened, and very dominant in our marriage. But I say that because although I was doing those things, I think those things were coming out of a place of fear and lack of trust. And again, when you're in survival mode, and if you've grown up in any type of environment, any close to that, even a piece of it, you're going to have a survival mentality, because I didn't realize that that's what that was. You know, I thought I was just being the wife, like, okay, I'm planning everything. You just get to follow along because that keeps me safe. And I need to protect myself from you. And so that caused a lot of conflict, not early on. I think he like rode the wave for a while of like, basically, he wasn't responsible for anything because I was taking charge. But then I would complain. I would complain like, well, you don't do anything, or you don't connect with me.
But then also like, and which it created like a perfect kind of storm for us. I was very easily able to just kind of yield to all of those things, my personality, my upbringing. And so when she does want to be controlling and dominant, I was so laid back that I would just kind of let her. As our years progressed, and when she was wanting me to take more control and plan things more, which will cause like friction because it's not, she wasn't used to that. Anytime I would try to take a hold of something, I know she'll get a little tensed about it.
Yeah.
She won't have full trust in me in that, because obviously that's not the norm. So it's like having to learn a lot of the things that we didn't learn at the beginning.
Was she not trusting you because you didn't do it before, or was it have to more like of your background, how you mentioned about like you wanted to have control because then you're safe that way?
I think it's both. I think as women in general, we were created to feel safe. God created us to feel safe with our spouse. But when you do grow up in certain environments and that's not your norm, it's really hard. Even so, I'll give you an example. Like, we have a beautiful marriage, we have children, we have a beautiful home. But even in that, sometimes I don't feel safe, but I have to remind myself that I am. And it's just because that it could be trauma, it could be so many things. But I think the other thing for me is there was no consistency with him at the beginning. There was no consistency when he was trying to do those things. And then the other part was because I wasn't trusting him, I wasn't fully trusting God either. And so I really had to come to that realization, like, hey, like, you're not at the core of who you are. You don't fully trust me. Because if you would fully trust me, then you would give that kind of trust to your husband because he represents me in the marriage. And so that's my response to that. I don't know if you have something that's a different response to that.
No, I think that's perfect on. I know in those moments I didn't know why I needed like her to trust me at all. I was just kind of, going with the flow, all of that stuff.
I think practical ways, I'm super practical when I talk about spiritual things. But if I can give you guys an example of like what it could feel like, and it doesn't have to be a big argument. It could be simply as when we would go have family gatherings. And, I wouldn't feel like he was protecting me maybe in a family conversation or like he was standing up for me. A lot of the times because of my personality, and this happened a lot early on in our marriage, is like Brandi's the dominant one. Brandi makes decisions. Brandi tells Jonathan what to do. Brandi this and that. And that was never my heart. I think the first maybe 2-3 years was like that. But then when I started to realize like I really want him to lead. I wanted him to lead. But even like what was being projected was that I was leading, but it was also because he wasn't doing his part. And so although I would try not to lead, he wouldn't step up to lead. And then I would come home and I'm like, you could have said something. You didn't. You let them think that I'm this. You let them. And it was and it was like, it was so hurtful. So emotionally, I wasn't feeling safe with him.
Back then when I was like not wanting to lead, didn't know how and all that stuff. But I was also, the worst thing for me was her getting mad. That was like the absolute worst thing for me. And so for the majority of our years, I would all the decisions I would make was to not get her mad. And so when you're leading, there's going to be some conflict, like automatically. And I always had tentativeness because I didn't want to make her mad, and it was going to produce conflict. And so I wouldn't do it. And so anybody that is more on the passive end of the things, they're more laid back. A lot of times you're just going to have to suck it up and
there are some unique circumstances for us. So one, my personality is very much just more like authoritative, like challenging, like that's how God created me. So he wasn't asking me to change that component of me, but I was crossing the line and thinking I could be in charge in the home. And his personality is a little bit more calm. Yes, he's talkative. He can be funny, but he's not necessarily challenging, like in personality. He can be, but that's just more me. But if you don't mind, I wanted to read out of Ephesians 5, because that's where, in reality, we should have done this at the very beginning of our marriage. And I think you read over this, you're like, okay, cool, like it says that in the Bible, but you don't really understand what it means. And so Ephesians chapter 5, I want to start at verse 21, submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. And then verse 22 says, wives, submit to your own husbands as the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands. And I used to read this and it used to irk me. Like, I was like, why would God even put this in the Bible? Like, and again, I had an issue with submission because for me, it felt controlling. And because I was in an environment when I was younger that I could not control, and I grew up vowing, we make these vows to ourselves saying, I'm never going to be in that type of relationship, or I'm never going to let a man or a woman do this to me. So we make these kind of ties in our spirit that don't allow us to really understand, or it's actually, it puts a wall of pride over, what God's really their parameters, so we can feel as a wife feel safe. So in a different version, it says, "Wives, be devoted to your husbands." And so I think when I started to really seek the Holy Spirit and say, "Okay, Lord, like I know I struggle with the words to submit because of things that have happened to me, but what does it look like for me?" Like, what does it look like for you for me to do that? I want to be devoted to my husband. But here's the thing, my devotion to him, and it's really a choice. Submitting is a choice. So submitting isn't something that you have to do. Yeah. You can choose not to submit. Yeah. You can choose not to have, you can choose to live your Christian life in every other aspect but your marriage. Just like you can choose to live the Christian life in every other aspect but your finances. And so there's so many things that you can choose to be Christ-like in. But if we're truly trying to seek and be believers, it should be everything. And so for me, if it keeps going, and I'm sure he'll talk about this, but I needed him to be a sacrificial leader, which is truly not a macho leader, not a I tell you what to do leader. And again, and we said this on a Sunday, at the end of the day, if there needs to be a tiebreaker, I can trust him to be the tiebreaker. But what he does and what a sacrificial leader looks like to us biblically is that he considers me. He considers my needs, my wants before his. And because I know that now and I trust that any decision, anything that he's going to make, where to go out to eat, financially, spiritually, I know that he's thinking about me first and not himself. So I can trust and I can submit to a sacrificial leader. And even to a point where, and I wanted to share this, throughout our marriage, we had some difficult moments. And the Lord just like wrecked me this year when he's like, man, sometimes we're unholy. We're all unholy. And there's moments in our marriage that are really hard, where sin takes over and you have to confess those sins to one another and you feel so much shame. But what the Lord showed me is like, your husband is your covering for holiness. And that in the moments of your sinful self, like he's your covering for holiness and he's the grace that I'm extending to you. And I think if I can speak to women who are maybe on the verge or just like, I don't get that submission, that's really what it is that you're submitting for your husband to be your covering of holiness. So when you're in those moments of sin, he's going to cover you, just like Jesus came to be that middle person between us and God. And so that's kind of my say in that, but I'm sure you're going to say something within.
That's good. I think that was spot on.
Within Ephesians.
100%. And one thing that you said, this actually ties into like one of my next question was becoming a spiritual leader. So eventually you became the spiritual leader, right? Right. No, I'm just kidding.
Right.
But what does that mean to be the spiritual leader? What does that look like for you guys? What should that look like biblically? How do you become a spiritual leader? What does it look like?
I think it can definitely be a process. I guess ultimately you have to bear the weight of, the spiritual weight of your family. It's really, I guess it's kind of like, what can you do practically? Obviously, you got to be in your word and worship and prayer and all those things. Those are like the practical things out of that. But ultimately, it's again how you lead in the form of those things. How can you get your kids to abide by those? Your wife as well, and then just not letting your wife fight all the spiritual battles within your household all the time. She can be alongside, but like I'm talking like leading that charge. It is matter when the husband, the man, can do that, step up and lead that charge in the spiritual warfare that happens within our family and our surroundings.
I think one thing that Jonathan mentioned that I think was really good, babe, was he's like, for the first part of our marriage, I would be the one praying for our family. I would be the one, hey, let's go do this, or interceding. And like you said, fighting the spiritual battles. And it's almost like he coasted in that. But one thing, you want to share that analogy about a thief that you gave when you said, like if somebody was like coming into your home, like you wouldn't let them. I think that's a great analogy.
I mean, right now, we're in our home right now, and so I mean, if there's a somebody knocking on the door, and I mean, we're not expecting anybody and all that stuff. It's like who's answering that door? And the physical, I mean, if some people let their kids answer the door, some people will let their wife answer the door, and you can do that. You can do that all day, but eventually there's going to be somebody that's not very. He's got wrong intentions, right? I'm talking like a physical person, but we do this in the spiritual realm too, where Satan's knocking on the door. He's knocking on the door, and it could be in different avenues. It could be what you watch on TV, what you're watching on the tablet. Your kids are watching on the tablet, and there's all forms of ways for the door to kind of open, and it's who's answering that door, and then protecting, being a barrier. The same thing. We get salesmen all the time, and I'll be opening the door, and I'm the barrier, right? I'm saying, nope, sorry, we're not interested. And sometimes my wife answers it at some points, and to me that feels like I don't know, I don't know the salespeople. How do I know if it's a fake person? Right. How do I know that? But again, in the spiritual realm, we got to think of it like that. It's like Satan who's knocking on the door and trying to disguise himself all the time, disguising him with various stuff, and you being a barrier. Nope, that you check it at the door, and you see what it is, and if it's not something that you want in your house, you send it away. Right? Send it away. You be that person that is the protector for your family, and we got to do that spiritually. And I don't think we're doing that as men for sure. We're trying to let our wives handle that, and sometimes even our kids, and it's a dangerous thing for sure.
It is, and I feel like it is not a bad thing, but I feel like we talked about people worshiping in the front on Sundays. It's a lot of the times it's women.
Yeah, for sure.
You know what I mean? I feel like a women conference, they're full. Right, a men's conference is not not as packed, and so I do agree that us as men, man, we got to. And I remember what I shared with you on that Sunday. You know what I'm saying? I'm not gonna let the devil come into my household and allow my wife to fight that. I'm gonna rise up, right? You know what I mean? I talked to you about about even demonic presences that may try to come in 2, 3 in the morning, 4 o'clock at night. I was like, I'm not gonna let my wife battle these demons. I'm going to get up. And I've told you that for those of you that don't know, every now and then I deal with that. But there's times that I've gotten up, walking around my house, my apartment, and just praying. Okay, you're going to come in here, you're going to have to deal with me. You know what I mean? Because I'm a spiritual leader. And so I just love what you're saying, because what they're talking about is something that God's been speaking and dealing with me. You know what I mean? For the longest now. And not that I was letting my wife lead the family, but I did realize that I could be doing more, right? And then it's okay if you're in that spot and you're like, you know what, I am letting my wife lead the family. Hey, I am letting. It's okay that you finally acknowledge and you admit that's where you're at, but don't stay there, right? As a man of God, you have power and authority inside of you. That God is giving you this position as the man to be the spiritual leader in your home. And so right now it's a call for all men to stand up and be that spiritual leader in your home, because once that happens, man, we're going to see a change. We're going to see a difference, man. And
yeah, man, for sure.
How do I go back?
For sure.
I would say men, learn how to lead your wife emotionally. Learn to sustain the weight of her emotions. Yeah. Learn that. You're not there to dictate what she does.
Right.
And I feel like in the Hispanic culture, right, you grow up thinking okay, I'm married, you do what I say, and I'm just thinking man, as Christian men, no, it's hey, let's talk about this. Let's see what works for our family. Ultimately, yes, men, you should have the last say. But when it's being abused, man, God takes account for that. God will take account for the way that you maybe manipulate the scripture so you can get things to be your way. And I think for women, maybe you have a husband who is trying to lead spiritually. He's trying to lead your children. He's trying to parent with you. He's trying to have conversations. He's trying to hey, let's go to church. No, not today. Like he's trying. And sometimes it's you not submitting. Sometimes it's you still wanting to do things your way because you think your way is better. And I think at that point, you're just allowing the enemy to do what he wants with you, not even with your husband. And so I think as we start to do these things, everything shifts in your marriage. Intimacy changes. How you parent, how you view your wife and your husband. All of these things start to shift because it all goes together. You're lacking intimacy, sex in your marriage, and you probably need to have a conversation of who's leading and who's not leading, and then have those discussions. But we can that's another podcast too, because we can go into that one.
For sure. No, I mean
that was good.
I feel like with definitely men, and this is something for our 11 years of marriage, I've had to definitely learn. And towards the tail end, I would say like the past couple of years is where I started to grasp this thing of, hey, making my wife feel safe, making her feel safe. And once she does feel safe, and actually safe in all those categories, physically, emotionally, spiritually, all the things that I desired started to come. And almost every single man is probably going to, there ain't no man that's out there that's going to say like, oh, I want less sex. No, they want more sex, right? They want all these things.
Yeah.
They want to feel peace when they come home. All of those things. They don't want just to come home and then hear all the how bad you are. And like those are the things that you desire, but it's because what you're really doing. We always think that whenever I was just always thinking that that's kind of my wife's fault. Like she's the one that's not doing the things that I need her to do to make me do the things that back and forth.
Yeah.
But it starts with
cycle, yeah.
It's like it starts with me. It starts with the husband, the man, and the sacrificial leader, and you just gotta do it.
Amen. So that's all very like awesome and powerful that you guys are talking about. So now, all right. So now we're gonna kind of wrap this podcast up in a little bit, but I got a few more questions for you guys. So this is going to go for both of you guys, and we'll start with Jonathan. Jonathan, what do you admire most about your wife?
Dang, this is good. This is like testing moment right here.
Let's go.
I admire her always integrity to do what's right. She's always wanting to do what's right according to God, according to the Lord, and she'll do whatever it takes in order to do so. And so even the things that she doesn't like, or like the whole submitting thing that was where she had at the earlier stages, she knew that was the right thing, and she would do whatever it takes to get there.
And Pastor Brandi, what do you admire most about Pastor Jonathan?
I admire that Jonathan fully embodies grace. Because I think for most of my life, I didn't know how to receive that. And so I admire that he extends that and that he allows me to be who I am in all forms. Sinful, not sinful, crazy, not crazy. And he's still there. He sees the best in me. So
that's all very awesome. But something that Desiree and I noticed is that you guys leave room for each other's gifts. Right? There's no, at least I don't see any competition between you guys. You're very supportive of her and you're very supportive of him, right? And so you guys created like this culture of you guys allow room for you guys' gifts, for you guys to go out, and you respect and you honor your guys' unique gifts. Why is that so important as a spouse to support each other's calling?
When you get married, you're one, so like you guys are going to, like, if you guys are competing all the time, you're just going to have fights if you're trying to compete callings or so. I know with us, we have different gifts, but we kind of like just dance together in those gifts. Wow. And I really like this whole marriage thing. I view it as a dance where we both got to be in sync with each other, and we have different giftings, different abilities, but ultimately, we're one, we're together, and yes, we can do our own separate things too as well, but we have to be important that it's not a competition with it. Who's had more time, who's got to a higher calling or whatever. It's not really, we don't look at it as viewed as that. And so that's been important.
Yeah, I love this question. I think that it's not talked enough within the Christian realm and in ministry. Before I knew Jonathan, I was called. So my calling didn't come after I got married. I already had it. I was passionate about it, and he never once prevented me from it. But just like you mentioned, it's a dance. We had to learn the dance of how to navigate that. I was in full-time ministry before he was. And so even right now, and I mentioned earlier, we have a unique dynamic. I'm the executive pastor, which technically means I'm a little bit of his boss. And then he's the creative pastor. But even in that, I don't view it as like I get to tell you what to do. I view it as like I'm a pastor. He honors my call as a pastor. He honors me as a pastor. I honor him as a pastor. But I also know that he is so secure in who he is.
Amen.
That he doesn't have to compete with me.
Right.
If there's any insecurity, we do talk about it because there has been sometimes. But I think that when you are so secure, male or female, in your call and you're married, it doesn't leave room for competition. Right. And so he 100% supports everything that I do. And vice versa, I support him. And I think we honor each other in that. I think God gives everybody specific gifts. I also think it's a myth that when you get married, you have to be in the same ministry or have the same call. Right. That's completely a myth. I also don't believe that the husband is the only one who gets to do their call first. We're living proof that that's not how it happened with us. We got married, and within 2 years, I was in full-time ministry. Wow. And I was already doing the call that God had placed on my life, and he came in a little bit after. I think even in that, there's so many topics of like, should women be in ministry, not be in ministry, all these things. And I think for me, it's like, I know what God said about me and him, and we're just going to honor each other in that. Amen. And we're going to allow God to do what he wants to do. Right now, we get to serve together at Passion Church, and we get to do these things together. And we got to preach together. Yeah. But I just believe that husbands, wives, like, be secure in your call, because if you're secure in your call, then there's no room for competition with each other. Wow. There's plenty of room in the kingdom for you. So if God called you, he knew there was going to be other people around you with either similar giftings. He knew your husband. He knows you. And so if there's any root of competition or bitterness, I would say there's some insecurity there that you have to take up with the Lord, submit that to him, and then run your race. We still have to run individual races. We don't run it together, but we support each other. He's out on the outlines, cheering me on, giving me water if you want to make it practical, right? Vice versa, until I cross the finish line. And the same thing for him. And so, anyways, I can keep going. I love that question.
Yeah. One last comment would just be like, when one of us is winning, we're both winning. If we're on the same team, that's how it is. When you think of sports, there's teams out there, and I don't know, you want to be like, oh crap, you got a 70-point game, man, and you're angry about that because he's on your team. Like, I don't know, if you support the person that you're on the same team with, you want them to have a good game just as much. And so when one person wins, we both win. So,
amen. Well, I appreciate you guys being on the podcast. We finally made it happen. It took like a year, I think, probably. I think we were saying it for a long time, but initially I was gonna get her and you like separate. You know what I mean? But I was like, let's just do collaboration. You know what I mean?
Collabs.
Celebration. No, I'm
the year collabs.
Yeah, so collabs. So I really appreciate y'all, and maybe we'll do this again. Yeah, because there's a lot to talk about.
A lot more stuff to unpack.
Maybe we'll do a little series.
All right, guys. So thank you guys for watching More Than a Minute podcast, and God bless y'all.